Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Buckeye Weekly Podcast. I'm Tony Gerdeman here more than ever with Kevin Noon. Kevin, how's it going?
It's going well. We were on campus on Thursday for an Ohio State football camp, and suddenly a press conference broke out. Granted, we knew the press conference was coming, but had to see all of our little friends and everything else, except for Tom, who's getting fitted, obviously, for an ankle monitor. Um, but outside of that, we got to see all of our little friends, and we got to talk some real, some real football, and why it wasn't necessarily X's and O's. A lot of stuff I think that fans are interested in. Learned a couple things, and they say that you're supposed to go out every day and like learn something. But when I learn something, I forget two other things. So I may show up shirtless to the next show because I may forget to wear a shirt.
One step forward, two steps back. Yes, we talked with Ross Bjork today, and for an hour and 15 minutes, he just went. There's questions and answers, of course. I don't remember the last time I was at an hour and 15-minute question and answer session at Ohio State. I think Ryan Day went for about an hour last summer once, but this was all basically anybody who had a question got it answered, and so that was a very good thing. And one of the first things we're going to talk about Ross and Ohio State and Fox Big Noon Kickoff and things like that. But first, I think one of the most newsworthy things that came out is Ross Bjork explaining where this $20.5 million is going to go. And every school has a cap of $20.5 million. Doesn't mean they're going to spend it. Ohio State is going to spend that. And the money is $2.5 million of it is going to the new scholarships that are being created by by the new roster limits. But then the rest of the 18 is going to be split up among four sports. And the players on those sports, and that's football, men's basketball, women's basketball, and women's volleyball. And I asked him, hey, you want to give us a breakdown on who's getting what, how much that is? And he said no, but he did say other programs have talked about what, like, was it 75-15 and then 5-5 or something like that, or 75-10, where football is going to get the majority of it for football schools. And then the other three sports, or whatever sports you've got left remaining, will get that last bit. But were you surprised that Ross Bjork chose this year to not give out a monetary figure when talking about the football team?
Fool me once, fool me twice, and trade secrets and everything else. And I kind of went through the same thought process that you just kind of went through right there about, well, I'm not going to get pinned down to number this time, you sons of guns. No, I think the thing I was most surprised with was that sport number 4 was women's volleyball. Obviously, women's ice hockey has probably been the most successful women's program right now. I mean, obviously, there's been, the synchronized swimming has always had success, but, I think when you're looking at some of the Olympic sports that get more eyes, I would have expected women's hockey, but, Southern California, I love volleyball. I went to high school with an Olympian on the U.S. women's team, so I'm not, not opposed to any of that. It was interesting because, we certainly have heard the 20.5. There was a point he said 25, and I was like, that's not right. And then he said, he corrected himself and said 20.5. And Ohio State's going and creating what, like, was it 91 new scholarships or whatever with all this. So, you have to kind of make sure you do the deductions, and okay, the 2.5 comes out of the 20.5, which gets you down to 18. But I guess baked in yearly, there's like a 4% increase. I mean, all sorts of numbers. I was told there would not be math or anything like that. But it's, yeah, we know where most of that money is going to be earmarked for, but you got to make things equal up when it comes to Title IX. And, there's a lot of stuff that's in play right there, and things that, maybe we think about. And even if we do think about it, we don't necessarily know how all of that is put together.
Yeah, and there's still some disagreements on how Title IX will work. And as Ross said in his press conference, it's never been about revenue. It's about access and opportunity. And every female athlete at Ohio State has the same opportunity to make money that Jeremiah Smith does, that sort of thing. I mean, look at the pitcher at Texas Tech making $1 million or whatever. women's softball. So there is that opportunity. But we'll see. And it'll grow every year. Like you said, 4% every year. And he said he hopes that maybe they can add more sports to this revenue sharing. It is interesting, though, because I never just assumed they would just cut it to like 4 sports. But like, I guess it's better to have it. There's more for that 4th sport than if you just spread it out over all 36, then thank you for my $7, that sort of thing, where it's like, what's the point? And in terms of, before we get to move on with the show, why not women's hockey? I bet Nadine Meiserall, the head coach, would be like, just give me an arena. We'll worry about the players. Give me the arena. And that's kind of the thing with women's volleyball. They've got the arena. Now they need the program. They
got the Cavelli's nice. And something else too, as I sit here, we're kind of talk it through, and I hadn't had really anybody talk it through at this point. A lot of the women's hockey team are Canadian nationals, and there are restrictions with student visas about how you can't earn on that. I mean, that was something that we saw with Hero Canoe before he transferred to Texas, being a German national and everything else. So, there are people far smarter than me. I don't know about you, but far smarter than me figuring this stuff out.
Well, and I guess that explains why there's no hockey on this list, men's or women's. So there you go. That's where just wanted to give you guys an update on where the revenue thing is and who's getting paid. Can't tell you how much, but the money is going to start rolling in on July 1st. Kevin, one of the questions, Darren Hope from 11 Warriors asked Ross Bjork, hey, what was, how did the process with talking to Texas about moving the Ohio State game, whether it be a night game or a Sunday game, how'd that go? And he said they started looking at the situation last fall in terms of what this fall looked like and what the possibility of they just laid out the schedule, basically, what things might look like. And if at that point you don't realize that it's going to be a noon game, then, you need to reevaluate who's helping you. And I'm sure they did. And he said that they looked at it, they tried, but Kevin, these contracts with these television networks, boy, they sure are, they don't want you getting out of those. They don't want you changing any of those things. And, while Fox did have a 3:30 window, Ross didn't even talk about that. They were talking about moving it to a night game. And basically the way I read it, or the way I heard it, is that NBC's not going to budge off. Like, NBC doesn't want that there. Fox doesn't necessarily want to move it if they don't have to. And Texas wasn't willing to do anything that they had a control over. So, like, the only people that were willing to do something here is Ohio State.
There are like 50 things I want to say here. They're all rushing for like one little door, and I'm not going to be able to get any of them out here. So I'm going to try to stay in order so I don't ruin the whole segment with just one long diatribe. But
expletives?
Well, maybe that's generally safe for the Big Me kickoff. But the point is that, Texas was able to veto anything that moved it off of Saturday. And Fox wasn't, Fox picked the game, and Fox pays the lion's share. I mean, and Ross even went even further to say that NBC and CBS essentially kind of like sublet the Big Ten deal. Which, I guess is 6 of one, half a dozen of another. I always kind of thought everybody kind of had their own individual deal, that it wasn't like, letting some guy like sleep on your couch or whatever like that. You're letting them like sublet off of your lease or anything like that. But that was kind of the impression I got with the NBC and CBS aspect of, they're paying less. Their 50% of the deal brings in less money than Fox's 50% of the deal. So there's a lot going on with that, but, not to get ahead of ourselves, certainly there's no reason strategically to why Texas would agree to move off of it. And it's only going to be louder and, dare I say, more annoying next year when ESPN ABC immediately comes out of the gate with Ohio State at Texas and announces it as a night game. And Ohio State will have no recourse at that point because it's not being moved off of its slot, and it's staying within the parameters of the Texas SEC media rights deal. And we're going to be going through this all over again. And I know that there are people who have been critical of me. It's like, you should have the fans back. Well, no, I just understand how TV contracts work. It doesn't mean I don't feel your pain. but it just kind of is what it is. And there's a lot of this current TV contract that is what it is because Ohio State is Ohio State and carrying the water.
I'm one of I think Dan then followed up. Do you feel like you guys may need to throw your weight around a little more the next time those contract negotiations come up? And Ross's response was, you know, what does that mean? Like, I guess it depends on what that means. And the thing about Ohio State and what Ohio State fans are wanting is just be more vocal. But the thing is, Ohio State is vocal when they take the money to the bank and say, "Please put this in our." That's where Ohio State is being vocal, and that's not going to change. Now, what is changing is said he's either has or plans on talking to Tony Petitti, the Big Ten commissioner, and saying, "Hey, is there anything you can do about this? Because we've carried Fox Big Noon kickoffs for the past
Since
year.
inception.
Since inception. And especially last year with 5 of their last 6 games were noon games. 5 of those were big noons. Is there any wiggle room? Not that they're looking for. Basically, they just can somebody else do some of the work, and that's what's being asked. You're not getting out of this contract or anything like that, or just refuse to play during the day and just play at night and force Fox to broadcast.
So a strongly worded letter that we're really, really bad.
That's Ohio State's going to take the money and they're going to be very happy with the money. However, if Tony Petitti can say, or can they, what I think Ross was talking about, some flexibility where, geez, just because this, you look at this one, boy, that's Fox, that's Big Noon. This is going to be Big Noon. But can we veto at least once? You know how Ohio State can veto that they don't do Friday night games, but can you back out of one of these situations with Fox, and can that be part of the can the commissioner, can the Big Ten help you there? Because right now Ohio State has no say in any of this. I think Ross would just like either a little more say or a lot more understanding from Fox. And the West Coast teams are basically, they're not impacted by this unless they're on the road. So those 4 teams, they're not factored in. The 8 or 9 or 10 other bad Big Ten teams, they're not factored in. So basically it's Ohio State, it's Penn State, and it's Michigan that are, and maybe Colorado if things are going well with Dion, because that's a Fox property as well. But that's really, that was 2 years ago rather than last year. But you're asking just a handful, and Ohio State mostly, to do all of this. And at some point, can we just get a limit? I think that's what's going to be the next step for Ohio State. But I don't see any of that changing anything.
So we're only proposal in the Ohio State House to try and limit. Oh, wait, there is, and Ross didn't want to necessarily get into it, and it's such a staged and futile act, just like any petition out there. We're going to have chants, and we're going to chant no to noon, not Kevin Noon, Big Noon. I mean, whatever, what the hell ever. But like Florida State had its issues and Clemson had its issues, and Florida State was kind of the one that ran headfirst into it with the ACC and trying to get, different payouts because of success, and nobody gives a crap about Wake Forest or whoever. I could go down the list. UVA, there's a lot of dead weight in the ACC. You're not necessarily going to be able to do that. You're in a contract. It is a contract, so you're kind of stuck with what you got at that point. And the reality is, I don't necessarily see a scenario where Ohio State is going to be able to, at even the next round of negotiating, to be able to get its own rider put into this, because how the Big Ten is going to get its most money? By putting Ohio State on at noon. I mean, that's just what it's going to be. As long as that's Fox's strategy, then you've got to figure out how to fix the issues you have with noon games, more so than worrying about how you're going to fix noon games, because they're not going to go away. Um, and we're what, 2 generations away from only getting three Ohio State games on TV, maybe at that point, and we're like a generation away from when you had to get ESPN pay-per-view to see all the games and everything else. So, we've come a long way, but there's always going to be a cost, whether or not it's a financial cost, whether or not it's a cost of convenience, you're giving up some convenience or whatever. And, I think people are still going to go round and round about what the real issue is about noon games, dead stadium, recruiting disadvantage. I just want to get tore up. I mean, I think all of those, if we're being honest, are going to be things that are going to be said, but I think I want to get tore up is probably the most honest of the answers. And spoiler alert, I would love to, but I got to work. So 3 for me, please. And that's it. That's my cap. 3 for me. And then I'm done. And anybody who's been to the tailgate, I go to some pregame. So no, I'm pretty good about 1 really, if we're being honest. But when I got to ask my question of Ross today, and we'll kind of maybe get into that a little bit more, I wanted to start. I kind of wanted to get off and say, people are all concerned about the being on Big Noon. You know what the alternative is? Having 8 and 4 seasons and not being asked to be on Big Noon. And I think that that's going to go over much worse than the first of first world problems.
Yeah, no, this is very much a first world problem. And so knowing that that's the environment you're living in, Ross is now trying to figure out working on ways to make the game day environment at noon better. Because as you said when you were asking him, the sleepy fans, the sleepy environment of noon, like what can you do to it to help it rather than, and not just turn the music up louder, the different things that you can do.
New ribbon boards.
And that's coming. Those things are coming. Moving the band back to the north end zone area. That's where they were when I was in school back in the 90s. And the place was plenty loud back then, honestly. And students weren't in the south stands. You didn't need them there. They were in the north where they're going to be again, at least some of them. I think those are positive things. More involvement from the band, which would sound like something they were going to do. But he's talking about moving forward, but also incorporating Ohio State's history, which there's a ton of. And he mentioned, even the tunnel, like the tunnel ramp, like what can you do there? And I'm thinking, Kevin, have you ever seen those Japanese game shows where they're trying to climb up the slippery stairs? I'm just a bunch
all of it's like MXT. All of it is like MXT. Amen.
And watch the band come down and then try to get back up. And I guess, that's the next thing that would be better, almost better than knock her ball down the tunnel.
That's the thing, is you have the people come down there and then you have somebody with a giant oversized bat who just tries to hit them up into the C deck. You might need a waiver. Need a waiver.
And some of the things that we joke about on the show and other shows are about, the game day atmosphere or the, now we're going to take a break and welcome our sponsors. And he's like, we got to make those shorter. And when we're honoring people, make those shorter. And where can we do those? And so they recognize that those are issues. I think one of the other issues is just the stop and start of college football broadcasts now, and probably you can say that of all sports, because live sports is the only thing that you can't fast forward. So you've got ample opportunity, the best opportunity to throw ads in, commercials in. You're trying to sell everything. And Ross is trying to sell everything inside the stadium and outside the stadium to make money to pay for all of the things inside and outside of the stadium. And so these are all opportunities that you've kind of got to maximize. And they're doing that with the 1922 club and things like that. And the south,
the new stuff on the south stands, the premium seating over there.
Yeah. So they're trying to find different ways to maximize their revenue. And you've got a grand place to do it, but it's an old place. And anytime you start changing it, Kevin, people start to get upset about it as well.
Well, they do. And, for people who didn't get to watch the 75-minute press conference, I mean, we do have it here at youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. But Ross obviously has thought through everything, even to the placement of the dumpsters. He even brought up where the dumpsters are, and they're going to have to build somewhere to put the dumpsters elsewhere, but they're accessible. I mean, so this isn't this is a great, theoretical question. And, in a perfect world, I mean, I think that they've given it thoughts. And I've been very critical of game day experience. And, and people will be quick to bring up the Tennessee game. And the Tennessee game was a one-off because it was not part of the season ticket package. It was not, your donation and everything else did not guarantee you seats to this. I mean, Tennessee fans managed to get 25, 28, 30% of the tickets and everything else. And, Ross point blank said, we need more night games. And, with noon games, flashing the lights isn't going to really do a whole hell of a lot. In fact, Ross told no lies. He maybe didn't answer a couple of questions, but he told no lies. And, so I think there's reason to be hopeful in theory, but again, I just don't know in execution. And part of my question, and again, I got like the third to last question on like a long thing. So every time somebody asks your question exactly, you have to kind of figure out, okay, well, I got to rewrite it. So I'm constantly rewriting my question in my mind. And it's like, I know you can't go building to building, but you look at Penn State and the way that they have their tickets set out. And again, their stadium is different and it keeps the sound in, but like all of their insane people, are throughout the entire stadium because they're all insane, but their super insane people are all in one section. And that's just not how it is at Ohio State. So, I mean, you can have 2,000 more tickets that are not associated to an annual giving number for season tickets and everything else, but you're dealing with the bones of a historic old stadium that is old. Did I say that it is old? Because it is old. And
over 100 years.
And there's just a limit to some of the things that can be done. And it's going to be really difficult to just say, well, we're just going to sit there. We're going to blow up our practices, not the stadium. I'm not saying to blow up the old stadium. I'm saying to blow up some of the practices and maybe get some newer blood in certain areas of the stadium. I don't know if that's necessarily possible because I truly believe there's a finite amount of dollars as an athletic department that you can hope to bring in one way, shape, or form. So when you got the NIL arm and you've got, just football facilities arm and you have 35 other sports and everything else, and you're all fighting for the same dollars. Yeah. I mean, maybe you can get like 105% giving in a given year, but you can't count on that.
And you mentioned the 2,000 seats. He mentioned that Ross did that. They've set aside like 2,000 tickets per game that are going to be cost lower. I'm assuming those are going to be like the corners of south stands that never quite get sold. So you drop those prices and get those people in there if you can. But again, you're still always going to have empty seats because of the resale and the people who resell and can't find buyers and don't go. So that's always going to be an issue. Why can't they, and again, because of the contracts, but you have to be on Big Ten Network twice, like one non-conference game, one conference game. Why can't they just be like, okay, one of those other rules that we're going to go to, everybody has to have at least 1 or 2 night games on in conference play. Now, NBC's like, that's a great rule because they've got the 7:30, but there are rules that they have for this, for certain networks. Maybe they can create some rules for certain, for certain kickoff times. And as you said earlier, and this is something we don't really ever talk about, Fox sublets the games to CBS and NBC, meaning they essentially own all of the games. So just maybe charge more for some premium, night games from NBC if they can, or if there's because Ross is asking for some flexibility. And maybe if there could be some more flexibility, because I bet NBC would love to have Texas and Ohio State as opposed to, I don't know what they're going to have, Buffalo, Maryland. Probably not something like that, but whatever else, they would take that and probably wouldn't mind spending a little bit more for it. So maybe there could be some dynamic pricing of the games for the networks as well.
Yeah, it would have to come down to passing money behind the scenes between networks and everything, because all right, let's go down the rabbit hole here. Just you're off the top of the head, no real ton of history thought given to, well, all right, now you have to have X amount of night games or whatever. Now, is that night games in general? Is that home night games? Because then it becomes multiplication at that point. It doesn't become addition, it becomes multiplication, because everybody then is going to have those amount of night games. And then suddenly everything's going to be on NBC. And while everybody else may be all happy about that, especially NBC, Fox is going to be pissed. There are going to be other people that are going to be pissed, because you're going to completely change, the geometry of all of this. And, at the end of the day, players want to play at noon because they would like to get on with their day after for the game, win or lose, and everything else. So it's difficult. I mean, I don't know exactly what the answer is there. I think that, and it's really easy right now in June to sit there and look at the schedule and be like, well, that's going to be a meaningful game, and that's going to be a meaningful game. And yes, Ohio State, Texas is going to be a meaningful game. Ohio State, Penn State is going to be a meaningful game. There's, Oregon, Penn State, if they play each other, is going to be probably a meaningful game. And you can kind of circle these and try and adjust, but there's always going to end up being like an Indiana that's going to like overperform some year, or there's going to be like a Michigan State that's going to underperform or Nebraska that's going to underperform like almost every year. And that's why the NFL ended up having to have flexing and things like that, because, hey, let's have the Cowboys play 7 night games, and they can't win 4 games on the year. It's not quite that bad. I'm a Cowboys fan. I can speak ill of them. They're my team. But, and I did get to talk to Cooper Witten today. But, I don't know what the right answer is. I mean, they're such first world problems, which doesn't make them any less important to people in the moment.
Yeah.
But we're not talking about a situation of giving Mel Tucker a $90 million extension or anything like that, and how to extricate yourself from that. Or we're not talking about, Wisconsin, this may be a make or break year for Luke Fickell and everything else. Are they going to be any good? I mean, there are some real problems, and Ohio State fans are upset, incensed, if you will, about when their games are. So that is a much better place to operate from than any of these other places.
As opposed to, when does Ohio State play? All right, well, I'll just
when can you get here?
But like,
that's a Northwestern problem.
Yeah.
I mean, and where are they playing?
Well, there you go. Could be anywhere. One of the first things that Ross said when asked what can be done to improve the game day experience, he just said more night games. So that's something that they're going to really try to figure out how to do, and try to figure out if it can be done. And not just Toledo, Marshall, those, the Big Ten 7:30, Big Ten Network 7:30 game against, one of their non-conference opponents. And frankly, Kevin, drone shows during the day just don't work. They lose all of their appeal. You just look up and it's just a bunch of drones. They're not doing anything but flying around. And it's like, this makes no sense to me. So you need some night games for the drone shows, most specifically.
That, and, and the pyro and everything else too. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that certainly looks a lot better under the cover of darkness and everything else. And, again, I think that if you talk to me about the biggest legitimate real world issue with not having a night game is recruiting.
Yeah.
And with Ohio State recruiting modern day out in Southern California and recruiting Texas as much as it is and everything else, really hard to sit there and have a kid, play a game and everything else, and is not leaving their high school stadium until 10:30 at night. There's more relief if you're a West Coast guy because of the of red eye flights. But if there's not a 1 a.m. flight from Dallas to Port Columbus. So you do run into some disadvantages there, but we also know that 95% of official visits are happening in June. Mm-hmm. So it's great to get kids there for a nighttime environment and everything like that. But, really all of that stuff is more impactful on rising juniors and rising sophomores and kids that are coming there on their own dime, because generally by the time you get into the season, the hay's in the barn. The class is largely set. I mean, and especially for like an Ohio State, maybe still more so in the SEC, classes come together a little bit later. We did talk briefly about, signing periods and things like that. Maybe that just gets kicked to another show as we've already cleared the 30-minute mark. So yeah, I think that you do need to find something. I mean, the UCLA game would be a kind of a great place to do a night game. They're a West Coast team, so I mean that's 4:30 Pacific or 4 p.m. Pacific. Maybe you get a couple more, more than 7 TVs in LA that turn on UCLA. I don't know. There something's got to be done, and the fact that that Ross, he was asked 4 or 5 different ways about this, and he gave very thoughtful answers. And maybe while they were short on answers, there were no real answers at this point. But and then again, if this were the SEC, I think that Sankey would be out there rallying against it, and they would roll out all of their coaches at their spring media availability. And I'm not even sure what city the Big Ten does its spring. Its spring presidents and AD, meet. I think they do them out west, but I don't know, and it certainly wasn't on ESPN News or anything like that.
No, and we could do basically like 8 different shows of this length about the different topics that Ross Bjork was bringing up, but I just wanted to focus on one so that we could kind of stay on point.
I tried to stay in the rails, but
no, and
things are spinning in my mind.
And I did. It's like, well, let me just mention this. And you mentioned the 90% of official visits. That's something that Ross said. So he's like, I'd rather see signing day in June, or in the summer, in July,
or in August.
I guess.
I mean, before the start of their season. I mean, that way you don't have to you don't have to over recruit these kids. But I think a lot of SEC places are going to be against it. And I know recruiting has changed a lot in the last 5 years. But it always used to be that Alabama and Georgia and a lot of these schools wouldn't start recruiting until like November.
Yeah.
And if you were Georgia State, you were terrified. If you found a diamond in the rough, you're like, kid, don't do anything, don't say anything. We don't want to lose you. And then the kid suddenly, blows up, and the kid that was set to go to Georgia State now has 8 SEC offers, and I'll tell you where he's not going, Georgia State.
Well, the first year they did the early signing period, and I don't know if it was 17 or 18 or so, Urban Meyer was still the Ohio State head coach, and we were there on the December signing period day, and somebody asked, so how do you feel about the December signing period? And he's like, he holds up the list of commitments because like almost everybody is signed. He's like, I guess I can't complain. I mean, look, everybody signed early, and that's been the point where most of your class, 95% of it is signing early. And I would assume the same thing would happen with the summer period as well, because as Bjork said, if the kid knows where he wants to go, why not let him go there? I know Urban was always wary of that, of losing late blooming Ohio kids, not getting an opportunity to see those kids as seniors, but you don't really get the chance to see kids as seniors anymore. It's
do you run into that now that 85 is 105, but it's not? I mean, I think that there's still more of a mechanism in place that you can circle back now. Now, if that late bloomer commits to Kent or Akron or whatever, do that at your own peril. If you're going to bet on yourself, and those schools are going to probably try to strong arm you into signing at the earliest possible moment so they can hold on to you. So it's not a case of everything is necessarily, we know how it's going to work, but making kids drag this out to December, great. It's an early signing period by 6 weeks. That's great. It's like, I'm coming in for happy hour. What does this $5 beer cost? $4.95. I mean, oh, thanks. I mean, that's essentially what the early signing period is. It's like a 5-cent discount. So, yeah, that's got to be solved. There's a lot of stuff. Again, I could fatten this show up to 3 hours or whatever, talking about the SEC, 8 games, 9 games, et cetera, talking about, future series of beyond Texas with Alabama on the schedule and some of these other games. And if we had like unlimited time with Ross, and maybe even we could turn the cameras off for a minute. It's like, okay, do you really think we're going to see that series take place? Or are we going to see a major shakeup in how, football is constructed between now and then? And that's just a couple short years away.
Well, and we do need to wrap up the show, and maybe we'll do like a 2-hour live show on Big Me Kickoff tomorrow, Kevin. We can just go all over the place. I'm not holding you to that. But afterwards I asked Ross, because we shouldn't even start this, but the 4-4-2-2-1 versus the 5+11. And I mentioned to him, like, if it goes to 5+11, say goodbye to Ohio State versus Texas, those kinds of games. And he's like, yeah, nobody's going to do those anymore. So that's where you have some of these. You want to talk about game day, improving the game day environment. Keep the good games would be one way to help all of that. And as I said, we could have done 8 different shows like this about all of the different things that Ross Bjork had to say. And I did a rundown of bullet points of everything he said. You can find that at BuckeyeHuddle.com. That sounded like it was an hour and 15 minutes. Got the video up at youtube.com/BuckeyeHuddle. You can find it there. There was a lot, and it was all very interesting. We didn't even get into the stuff that they're creating for analytics for all of the coaches and the NIL arm that they're creating. So that's all stuff that you can just read about at BuckeyeHuddle.com. And hey, now's a fantastic time to join up if you've not yet done so. $4.99 for your first month. Check us out there on the Buckeye Huddle message board. Talking about camps this week, last week, official visits. There's a ton going on there as well. So please check us out. Thank you all for tuning in, and we'll talk to you guys later.